Dear colleagues, we're on day 243 of Ukraine's heroic resistance. My name is Natalia Staropravo. We will continue our series of briefing from Mediacentru Ukraine. I would like to introduce our guest, Leif Larson, Managing Director of FP1 USA, expert on NPR and communication. We'll be discussing how Russian narratives work in the United States of America. Leif, hello, can you hear us?
Yes, I can, and thank you for having me.
Відразу
I will start immediately with the question. Perhaps I'll primarily set it up real quick. In the Western media, among the journalists, among various media representatives, we have Russian narratives working, the so-called claims that trying to get the U.S. not to provide help to the U.S., trying to push Ukrainian President Zelensky to negotiate with Putin. What can you say about how Russian propaganda functions in the United States?
Well, I would say that the idea that Americans are in two different camps, one with continuing the financial support through military weapons and support financial from the U.S. government, and those who are of the idea that America has its own problems and that money should be used for Americans first. Right now we are in the middle, or towards the end actually, about another 10-15 days of an election that will decide control of the legislative body in the United States, the Congress. And there are some on the Republican side who support an America first idea, that we should secure our borders first, use all of our funds to help Americans, and not give as much to foreign nations. Now, they are driven by this idea of America first, not so much the Russian propaganda. They don't trust Russian propaganda, but they also have this belief that we must do what we have to do for Americans first. One idea that I think has come to light recently that can be used to push back against that idea and to bring more of a united front for the continued support against the Russians by supporting Ukraine, is that the involvement of Iran in the Ukraine, especially Crimea, and support of the Russians is a means to get those people who have been on the side of giving less to Ukraine to pull them back into the idea that supporting Ukraine, defeating Russia is in our best interest, because Iran is and has been an enemy of both the conservatives and the liberals in the United States, and I think it can be a unifying enemy target to say, if the Iranians are siding with the Russians and the Russians are siding with the Iranians, it cannot be good for the Americans if the Ukrainians do not defeat the Russians.
However, in American media, how are Russian fake narratives separated from journalism? Is there an understanding of what is true and what is a fake narrative, a false narrative?
There is. There are some through social media, which has been a problem in the United States for about the last 5 years with disinformation, allowing some Russian ideals of Ukraine brought this upon itself, that the Russians were backed into a corner and had to do what they did to do. But that is believed by a very small number of people, and I would say at least 70% of the American population believe that this is an illegal attack on the Ukrainian sovereignty and the Ukrainian people. And as more and more tales come true, in the last polling I saw, 50 to 60% of Americans believe that this is a genocide against the Ukrainian people, not just an armed, violent attack.
На початку нашого
At the start of our conversation, I had already mentioned some separate Russian narratives. What other Russian narratives are present in the United States that you know of, that you're aware of?
Well, there was the one that came up early in the conflict, that there were biochemical laboratories that were being funded by the United States, and that those were being used to develop biological weapons outside of the United States, but for the United States, and that Ukraine was assisting with that. That has become less and less believable, and has lost a lot of its credibility over the last couple of months. The one that has really kind of held its grip on some people is that the idea, and this is more of is because of an American bias, is that NATO is to blame for some of this because of their expansion and causing fear and uncertainty in Russia, and that I would probably say is the number one propaganda idea that has kept somewhat of a credible group of people thinking maybe this was brought on by NATO and not so much by a crazy lunatic Putin and an aggressive Russian foreign policy.
Journalism has the rule of balance of opinion, and in one way or another, of course, the U.S. media also get their information from sources, including Russian sources. What main Russian sources are present or are watched by American journalists?
And that's an interesting question, because this morning there is more of a push to block and ban RT News. I'm sure all of you are familiar with recent comments by RT News analysts and commentators that advocated for the drowning of Ukrainian children who did not support Russia, the rape and torture of those who do not embrace the Russian invasion. And I think as Russian sources go further and further into this panic over what is happening, you will see less and less credible sources that American journalists in particular can turn to and can rely on. I would say, maybe sometimes, it's just a matter of losing all credibility before, anybody just completely tunes out anything that they hear from a Russian source.
we can't not mention here the famous scandal with Elon Musk. We see possibly an effective influence of Russian propaganda. Uh, can you confirm or deny? Is it Russian propaganda at work with Elon Musk's opinion, or is it his personal interests?
With Elon Musk, I think it's his personal interests. Um, he like any businessman is looking to a future 15, 10, 5 years down the road when this is no longer an issue, and he might want to do business in Russia, and he's trying to play both sides. There is an old American movie called The Karate Kid, which in the one of the lessons that is taught to the young boy in the movie is that you never say I will try. You say I will do, because saying try is you walk on one side of the road, you're safe. You walk on the other side of the road, you're safe. You walk in the middle of the road, and eventually you get squished like a grape. And I think Mr. Musk is going to find out that walking in the middle of the road is not a good place for him to be, especially with his interests in the United States. And I think you will see him tune down some of this rhetoric of working with both sides. I also think it has something to do with, let's not be blinded to the fact that Mr. Musk is running a business and it's costing him money to keep some of these satellites going. I think he's looking to get repaid probably by the American government. And I think once that happens, or a deal is cut, that he will back off some of this rhetoric that he has been tossing about regarding working with the Russians and finding some sort of idea of ceding Ukrainian territory for peace.
Початку
At the start of this full-scale invasion, there was a lot of particular interest to Ukraine from the West, from the world community. By now, how have the dynamics changed of watching, of attention to Ukraine in the United States? How have this changed? How has this changed?
Well, I can speak from a political standpoint. I had been discussing some things with Ukrainian businesses, trying to get meetings with members of Congress, the United States members of Congress, and running into roadblocks because of the things that had happened with Trump and Biden and all the scandals regarding that, and the idea and the belief that all Ukrainian businesses and financial institutions were corrupt and run by oligarchs. It was impossible for Ukrainian businesses really to get a meeting with a member of the legislative Congress here. Today, after the Russian invasion and the violence perpetrated by the Russian troops on the Ukrainian people, I think all of that other stuff has been pushed aside, and it is now, I believe, a little bit easier and a little bit more of having seen Ukraine through a different light, and I would say probably Americans and the American legislative representatives are a little bit more open to meeting with Ukrainian businesses probably in the future, and also, of course, on a state level basis.
we spoke of the Russian resources that are used for information about the war in Ukraine. But apart from that, what main sources do Americans cite as far as Ukrainian sources are concerned? Are any Ukrainian sources a resource for information in the States?
Well, yeah, again, it's a an American issue. Fewer and fewer Americans turn to newspapers and to television news organizations to get the news that they absorb, that they believe. I think the last time I saw that only 40% of Americans would pick up a newspaper believing they were going to get the truth. What we have found is to influence certain groups, you need to target your message to them. I would say for mothers, what we call, soccer or football moms, stories about the violence against children, how families are torn apart. That is a good message to target towards those. I would say, as I mentioned earlier, for the group of kind of Trump Republicans, the message of if we don't stop the Russians and the Iranians here, what will happen when the Iranians get a nuclear weapon? Will they use it against what they have called the United States as the Great Satan? That's a good message of we either defeat the Iranians and the Russians here, or we're left to an idea of what will happen in the future. And those are two different messages targeted to two different groups. And I think in today's media, that's kind of where we are at, especially in the United States. It's targeted news. You need to find out what message will move one particular group. That's not fake news. It's not a disinformation campaign. It's just finding out how best to get your viewpoint to a particular group of people in a diverse American audience. I would say what got a lot of good press, I think, on when if you use the word good press, I think what moved a lot of people was when the drone attacks in Kyiv started again, and in the country and in the cities around it, there was a Snapchat video of a young woman who was walking on the street doing her Snapchat when one of these drones hit the building behind her. That got a lot of play, and I think works on a lot of levels for a lot of different demographics. So I would say, using and disseminating information, using social media, not the standard, media, but going directly to posting videos on Snapchat, on Facebook, on Instagram, highlighting different ideas. The unsettling of life through, what most Americans would have, and most Americans do, which is walk down the
Лев,
street and
я
do
би
a
хотіла,
Snapchat video.
я би хотіла
Very, very sorry. I just wanted to nudge you. I wanted to lead to the fact that the war, Russia's war against Ukraine, has become a bit of a example of a somewhat effective information war, right? Where apart from a war theater, we have an information theater. What conclusions would you say have the American journalists, the American society, and the American politicians made for themselves about how to combat propaganda and disinformation?
Well, I think it's in fighting back against propaganda, I guess the Russian propaganda. is the fact that the more and more outside sources, if it's not just Ukrainian sources, if it's people from the UN, if it's British sources, if it's French, German, um, Scandinavian sources who are saying this is all untrue, there is no truth to this, that carries a lot of weight with Americans, because sometimes they believe, oh well, they want our money, and so of course they're going to tell us things that may not be true. So I would say, getting outside sources, other correspondents, war correspondents from other countries, to validate the ongoing atrocities that are occurring throughout Ukraine is an important aspect of maintaining and pushing back against Russian propaganda.
Дякую, Лі.
Thank you very much for this conversation, Leif. With us was Leif Larson, Managing Director of FP1 USA, expert in PR and communication. Thank you very much. A very useful conversation for us, and thank you again.
Thank you.
А на сьогодні
This concludes our program for today. Please watch our announcements, and we are another day closer to our victory.